Hello and welcome to this video. I'm very pleased today to have a guest with me, uh, Doctor, I assume, Dr. Michael Raymer. And I think it's best if Dr. Michael tells you who he is and what he does. Obviously, if you're seeing this and you don't know who he is, you can see there's a lot of guitars behind him. I do believe he's got the devil's guitar behind him. The banjo is there as well. Uh, we're going to be exploring Michael's musical interests. But you want to just tell my audience who you are?
Yes, hello, Andy. It's great to be on your show. I've watched many of your videos over the years, and there's always something unexpected on the show. That's what I actually like about it the best. So, yeah, I'm a professor at the University of Oregon in the U.S., and I've been doing quantum physics research, both experimental and theoretical, for the past 40 years. And I've become, over the years, more interested as I approach retirement age, as many old physicists do. They kind of say, "Oh, I'm near the end of my life. I still haven't figured out quantum physics." And so, if you go back and look at Bohr and people like Heisenberg and Schrodinger, in the later years of their career, they started really worrying more about what you might call the philosophy of the problems. Whereas when you're young and energetic, you just treat quantum mechanics as a tool, which works perfectly all the time. You calculate things, you do experiments, they match up. If they don't, you go back and you fix it and you learn more about the deeper physics. But then there's always this lurking problem in the back of your mind. What is this quantum theory actually doing? And how does it work? And why does it work? And what is it telling us about the world? So I've been teaching, physics and quantum physics courses, doing research in my laboratory supported by the US government grants, educating PhD students for many years. And recently I wrote a little book here, Quantum Physics, What Everyone Needs to Know, and it's published by Oxford University Press. And
Link
then
below, everybody. Link below. Go and buy a copy.
uh, thank you. And then this is a free one. This is actually a comic book that I wrote about quantum physics, and it's aimed at the sort of high school level
Oh,
folks. And so I can make that available in a link as well. Uh, and the point is that even though quantum physics works really, really well every time, we still don't quite understand it. So I've been trying to think more deeply and reading more and more papers over my career about different interpretations, so-called, of quantum physics. And with the modern era now of quantum information science, which people refer to as quantum computing, there has been in the past 20 years a re-examination of the foundational ideas of quantum physics. And we talk about later, but quantum physics actually can be viewed as a theory of information as opposed to a theory of atoms and molecules. And so I would just one more thing about my background. The United States has a very large funded program in quantum information science. It's called the National Quantum Initiative. It was modeled on the UK quantum initiative about 8 years ago. And I was actually one of the people in the US that instigated the US Congress to write and fund this multi-billion-dollar grant. So in that way, I got exposed more to public communication and talking with politicians and popularizing some of the concepts of quantum physics and why it's important not only for fundamental science, but also for future applications. So that's me.
it's fascinating. One of the things I find very interesting is that when you've got a YouTube channel, you're looking at all the information, the analytics a little bit like a scientist. You go, oh, 3,000 people watched that video and 10,000 people watched that and they stayed for this. And it's all numbers. But so you're looking at quantity, but what you can't tell is quality because all these different people are watching it and you have no idea about that. And there's no way of measuring the quality whatsoever. And so it's been so enriching for me because I'm sending out whatever I'm doing and I don't quite understand that. It's been received by other people. And when they put something in the comments, if I'll spot if it's interesting, like with you, I spotted it and I said, give me an email straight away. And then before you know it, we're having a conversation, and there's a conversation going on between a rock drummer and a quantum physicist. And there must be something in the middle that is bringing us together in a way. Now, it's superficially it's the music. So, could you tell us a little bit about your music background? Because you're obviously a musician. You wouldn't be sat in that room if you weren't. So,
Right. So I've been a self-taught guitar player since the 1960s when I was a young kid listening to the Beach Boys and the Kingston Trio. And I picked up guitar and I've been self-taught ever since. And I've been an amateur singer-songwriter more or less for 30 or 40 years. And I find the creativity that's involved is just so much fun that I wake up in the morning and I have melodies and lyrics in my head. If I don't have that, then I have some physics, mathematics going through my head, and sometimes at the same time. And it's all just about creativity, making something out of nothing, or you could say better, combining all the previous influences that you've had over your lifetime and society over hundreds of years, combining those different elements to create something new. That's what's fun about it. And it holds both in physics and in music.
right. So I'm going to go straight in now, and I'm going into an area that is so mysterious to me, but at the moment it's become very, very interesting, and I want to get onto that and the ramifications for AI, which is the big thing. So this video is going to be about, I think, AI. But first, before we get to AI and how that relates to creativity, I think we need to discuss what creativity is. So the simplest way I can ask you this question would be, after spending 60 years or so doing quantum physics and writing songs, right? What do you think that creative process is? What's going on? Is there anything that you have gathered from a lifetime? Because obviously, a lifetime of doing quantum physics is more than just doing experiments. Like I say, you start to, it's like me with music. I've spent my whole life doing it. I can sort of stand back from it a little bit. And over the last few years, I've been standing back and going, what the hell is creativity? And what are we trying to do when we do it? And what's very interesting, you just link the sort of, I suppose, the inspiration for the sort of ideas about quantum physics. You've linked that to the sort of creative process. So, what do you think we're doing when we're being creative?
I've never answered the question like this before. I've never answered this question before exactly, but I've thought about it a little bit. And I think there's comes to mind two sides of it. One is just the practical practice of it. You're trying to create a body of work. And so in my business, we set up problems, we try to solve them, then we write a paper.
Mm,
And so I've published a couple of hundred, physics papers in peer-reviewed journals, and also educating PhD students, and they've written papers. And this is our body of work, which we contribute to. Now, to back up, when I was a very young student in college, when I looked up and I saw the founding famous figures of physics, Feynman and whoever, Gell-Mann and all these people, my goal was never to become on par with them or to ever believe that I could contribute at that level. My lifetime goal was just to at least contribute one useful idea to the world of science. If I could do that, then I thought, wow, that's great. Science is a big field. So to contribute something that may have a lasting, influence, maybe not a big one, but some kind of lasting influence. That may be a male-oriented kind of thing, our legacy, right? Okay. But I think it's just a way to say we want to make a positive impact on the world. So science can do that. Of course, there's also the negative impact of science, and AI may be one of those in the near future, we'll talk about. But you have many other well-known negative impacts. For example, I'm taking a long route here, sorry.
mm,
We're talking on the internet right now, which is an amazing technology. And my own research is in fiber optics and lasers. So I know a lot about how the internet was invented, who invented it. I've met a lot of those people and how it was developed. And it's a miracle of human, innovation. On the other hand, it's also a horrible thing because it now gives so much individual power to it gives so much power to individual bad actors Whereas before, individual bad actors had very little power. Now they have much more power. So technology enables, people to do things that could never be done. And it's all from 100 years of millions of smart people working together to build this stuff. So that's kind of the idea that the science is a practice. Now, the other side, though, of science and music is the mystery. They are both extremely mysterious. And I think I mentioned in my email to you that one of the reasons that I've stuck with science so long in my career is because I still don't understand it. And nobody understands quantum physics. There's this famous quote by Richard Feynman to that effect. And so just the fact that there's this lurking mystery just hanging out there is something that I can always aspire to approach, but yet never reach. And music is the same way, in a way. Like I'd like to write songs as great as Bob Dylan, but I know I never will. But I don't care, if I can engage myself in maybe the same process that Bob was involved in, but at my own level, then that's what I want to do. So that's my idea.
And as you're saying this, what's what strikes me and resonates inside me is the conversation I had with Narada Michael Walden, who is my hero. If you watch the channel, you know that Narada Michael Walden is my hero. I heard him on drums when I was 15 years old, and he was always been my favorite drummer. And then he went on to be a producer and a musician, and I love everything about him. He's always been someone I looked up to. When the channel started up, Narada got in touch, and I ended up talking to him. Now, my parents were technologists, not science. My dad was a metallurgist, so I grew up in a sort of very sciencey based family. I was brought up as an atheist by my parents. There was no religion in the house. So I have, as my core, quite a sort of rational, scientific, material way of viewing the universe, right? As I've done art and music, though, things have started to emerge, especially recently doing the channel. And when I spoke to Narada Michael Walden, he said something that I found very profound, and it was made more profound by the context that he'd suddenly appeared in my life, and he shouldn't be there because he's a famous person that exists in myth when I was a teenager. See, so suddenly he's there in front of me, and he started to talk about what I would call the profound, which is what you've just you can get close to it, but there's a mystery there. And he goes, that mystery is God. And it was a very interesting thought. And I went away and grappled with that. And I really did grapple with it. And I've sort of moved to being somewhere in the middle. And I have found solace in saying, I really just don't know. I think it's quite comforting to go, oh, I don't know. I don't know. At this moment in time, I don't know. But there is a desire there in the scientists, I assume, to know, isn't there? To elucidate some sort of truth. Would you say it's truth the scientist is trying to elucidate? And what is truth? Is that the
Well,
mystery?
yes, I'm no philosopher by training, so I won't speak from that point of view. I've listened to some of your philosopher guests, and there's no way I could keep up with that level of discussion. But from a science point of view, as from a scientist who tries to keep an open mind and reads what I can and think about what I can, I have come to the conclusion that science doesn't reveal the truth about what nature is. I've come to the position that I believe nature is inscrutable. It's not that we don't know what it is, it's that we cannot know what it is in this way of looking at it. And this is consistent with quantum physics. So from my own, training, I've grappled with this idea that, you have the famous Heisenberg uncertainty principle. If you measure the position, you can't measure the momentum of a particle at the same time. Okay, but that language would kind of imply that, well, the particle has a position and a momentum, I just can't measure it. But that's not true. It actually turns out that the concept of momentum and position for a given particle are not even compatible concepts. And this is going back to Niels Bohr. And what it means is to ask the question, well, say I measure the particle's position, it's here, and to ask the question, what is this momentum? That's an ill-posed question. It's not that you don't know the answer, it's that the question doesn't make any sense. And so that aspect of the world is inscrutable because if I measure the other one, the momentum, then the question about the position or location of the particle is an ill-posed question. So that's something that, classical physics just cannot get its mind around. And so the deeper you go into it, and when you look at the mathematics of quantum physics, which I've worked with a lot, the deeper you go, the more it tells you that it's possible that um, there is no physical reality that we can grab onto and actually grok. This word grok from from Heinlein's famous book Stranger in a Strange Land. You should go back and read that from the 1960s. One of the characters introduces a word grok, Grok, and this word became fairly common or popular during the sort of the hippie movement back in the 60s and 70s. And what it means is actually it's almost Zen-like or Buddhist-like. You can't even define what the word grok means because it refers to things that are undefinable. Okay, so it could be, and this is only a working hypothesis, that it's impossible to grok really what nature is. All we can do as human observers and intelligent agents is to build theoretical models that enable us to get as close as possible to grokking what nature really is. You can push on it and it feeds back to you information. That's what experiments are. I say you poke it and it responds. It's almost like a big blob of jelly. You poke it and it does something, but doesn't mean you know exactly what's inside the jelly. So the question is there really is something there? And of course, as a human, I think there is, but I'm not convinced that science can actually reveal really what is there. It only can reveal how it behaves and how we interact with it. And quantum physics theory is the closest we can get to describing that.
So is science? Would you say it's just trying to build a better mousetrap? Is it that
Well,
type of thing?
that would be called sort of like an instrumentalist viewpoint. Uh, it's also sometimes when you refer to the theory, they call it shut up and calculate. Is one of the ways of describing how you should think about quantum physics. And my joke is that I shut up and calculate during the weekdays, but on the weekends I try to think about what am I really doing here. So it's not just that you're building a better mousetrap, but you're also trying to understand as much as possible how these different mousetraps work and how I can model them with mathematics. And that's really what physics is. It is a gigantic mathematical model, not of what's actually there, but it's a model of how that stuff responds to us when we poke it.
Um, the next question for me, obviously, is what is this thing there? Because we're really talking about our consciousness, and we don't really know where to locate our consciousness as human beings receiving the consciousness. It seems like it's out there, but obviously, we can never be aware that the fact that we've got a brain that is receiving information and then the constructing the world for us. And it could be that, I mean, there's no way of knowing what we're actually perceiving, is there? If we suddenly grew another sense, we would very quickly have another perception of the universe, but we haven't got that sense. It's our senses that create the universe. Now, what I find fascinating, what you're saying, though, is I have always separated science and art. I've always felt that art is people are trying to elucidate quality, right? I've always thought that scientists are basically measuring quantity and they're trying to work out things from the world. That's very simplistic. If you back up and look what art does, and you look at what art does over time, feel that me as a musician, if I step back, I've questioned what I'm doing and I'm sure the musician side of you will bring this together. When you're trying to make a good piece of art, you're trying to balance two things, and you're like you feel like you're on you are kind of knife edge between these two things. You can go too far one way or too far the other way. But when you get it right, you're in like this Goldilocks zone and you're trying to mix these two things together. And I've thought about where these two things are, and I think they relate to our perception of the world. And I believe our perception of the world could well be time based and space based, if that makes sense. That there's we have and these are evolved and they relate to the hemispheres of the brain, perhaps. I don't know. I'm beyond because I'm not coming from a scientific point of view. I'm coming at the point of view of a musician that spent a lot of time in studios going, how do we make this better? And you're trying to balance these two things, and the only way you can describe it, one has to do with the grid. You're looking at the computer screen, you're going, oh, that bass drum's off, and you're looking, oh my God, it is off. We need to get that back in time. But then when you put it in time, you lose something, and what you lose is this sort of hedonistic pleasure, that sort of loop. And so you're trying to create a fine line. And I started to wonder whether this was related to some way that we have perceived the universe. And that's going right back to like single cell organism. There's a perception of this thing we're in. And and there is a mismatch. So what I find very interesting, and I could be way off here, but when the quantum physicist looks down, they get to this point where they find that the particle and the wave don't mix. That's basically, is that right? What you're saying, that they are two completely different entities, and what you're saying that is probably down to the way we are looking at them, that we can't see them any other way. Does that make sense? Is that another way of seeing it? Is it down to our perception as human beings? I don't mean perception and visual. I mean the whole lot. Our consciousness is not able to bring these two things together. It's part of us. Have I interpreted that right?
Well, when you say that, yeah, you said many things there,
Yeah,
and I'll try to remember, go back some of them. But this idea that if humans had more senses, like the ability to observe ultraviolet or X-ray,
yeah.
this idea was told to me also recently by a very famous scientist named Stephen Wolfram. I had dinner with him last year at a conference event, and you might want to have this gentleman on your show if you
Oh, I
can.
love it.
He's a fantastic, very famous mathematician who invented a computer program that almost all scientists use. It's called Mathematica. But he wrote this back in the 1980s, and this was the first sort of AI-powered mathematics engine that now I can do calculations, for example, in 1 second that would take me a week to do, without
Mm,
it. So this fellow, Stephen Wolfram, is famous. He's also a super genius, and he has an entirely new theory of physics that he's built up from digital programming. And it's very speculative and controversial. But what he told me at dinner was that exactly what you said, that humans are limited in their perceptions of the world. And this explains a lot maybe about the what we think of as indeterminacy or randomness in quantum experiments. But it's much more subtle than that because, like I said, it's not just that we don't have the knowledge of what's there. Some of what's there is inscrutable and cannot even be talked about. But still, in his theory, it does depend on the level of perception that you're at. So there's different levels of perception. Okay, but now going also back to what you said that if we had different senses, we could we could understand the world differently. I'd like to point out that in physics, we do have different senses. That's one of the main goals of experimental science is to build different kind of sensory devices, which you call detectors. We can detect X-rays. We can do microscopy at the single atom level. In fact, you can even, if you come to our lab, you can see a single atom with your naked eye, which most people don't realize. So what we have, not me, but a colleague down the hall, he has a vacuum chamber and he can levitate a single atom, say a rubidium atom, in this vacuum chamber using laser beams. And then he can shine very strong laser beam onto that atom, and the single atom can scatter into all different directions, just like you're shining a flashlight onto a ping pong ball. It scatters light
Mm.
in a dark room. You'll see the ping pong ball. You can see the single atom with your naked eye because it scatters so many photons in all directions. You see a little spot there, a little red spot, and that's one atom.
And the thing is that when that happens intuitively, I go, yeah, but you're not really seeing the atom. What you're
Ah,
seeing is a sort of a shadow or a reflection of the atom. But it's exactly the same for everything else we see is
that's
precisely
right.
that. And, although the wavelength of light is such that you can't actually get inside the atom and shine into it, but what you're
Hmm.
doing is
Hmm.
creating another sense, which is like vision, which creates that sort of perception. I find this absolutely fascinating. There's part of me wants to go, don't go there, Andy. You cannot equate the two. You are finding all this romantic artistic because I'm an artist. I've always been an artist. I'm reacting to it. It's actually giving me a little bit of my hair standing on it. Some of the stuff you're saying about, my God, you can levitate an atom and shine a light on it and see it because it's profound. And the profundity of it puts me in a place where I'm like, I actually don't know what to think. And in there's a space where creativity sort of comes in. And as you're talking, and you're talking about scientists, and I'm fascinated with the idea that when you look at the history of science, aesthetics were much more mixed in. If you go back to Pythagoras, he was almost like a mystic and a numbers guy all at the same time. And you see these two things emerging, and the Enlightenment. At the age of Enlightenment, you see these two things separate out. But before then, all our scientists, like Sir Isaac Newton, they were alchemists, and the alchemists were trying to achieve some sort of immortality. And then you describe a desire to create something, one of these sort of mouse traps, if you like, that would make you immortal. And a lot of the stuff you're saying, and I'm like there's the scientists are still trying to achieve what the alchemists were trying to achieve in terms of themselves. It is like a Nietzschean, say I exist, and because I felt that doing my YouTube when I die, and there's like 5,000 videos up there, to everybody around there, and I've done a whole video on this, I won't be dead. They can hear me chatting and talking and joking for the rest of time. And then the interesting thing comes in, and I had this thought. When I die, which I hope is a long way off, the AI should be so powerful then that it should be able to watch all my videos and basically recreate me for my
Mhm.
family, which would be indistinguishable to me. And yet intuitively, I feel that it wouldn't be me.
Mhm.
But would it not be me? And I don't know, right? So this comes to, I think, what you could really advise on is that when we look at why are people trying to get AI to be like us for? Do you see what I'm saying? It's that alchemist why are all the scientists trying to create AI? Why are they trying to do what we do? It's as though they want to create life. It's that whole Frankenstein thing. This is what scientists are like. This is why they can't be trusted. They're always in the lab trying to create Frankenstein, and it'll go wrong. And the artists have been saying this since the beginning of time. We keep saying it. The scientists. So I mean, it's not
But
really a question,
remember,
but what do you think about all that?
but remember, in my understanding, Dr. Frankenstein was not trying to create a monster. He was trying to do basic science. He was a medical doctor, biologist by our
Mm,
now standards. He wanted to
yeah.
know if you could build life. And possibly the reason, it's all fictional, but the reason was if you can build it, you can understand it. So if you want to fix your car engine, if you fix it yourself, you understand it better than if you give it to a mechanic. So you wanted to take it apart and put it back together to see how it works. And that's how a lot of children get started in science. They take the radio apart and see if they can put the radio back together, right? So life is, of course, one of the most challenging things to understand. So, Mary Shelley was way ahead of her time when she wrote that story. Like, here's what scientists really want to understand. Um, so back to intelligence, then. I guess the monster wasn't very intelligent, at least according to the movie version. I guess in the original book version, the monster was pretty intelligent. But then Hollywood turned it into a non-intelligent monster. Okay, so there's a difference between intelligence and you could say consciousness. And I think what the AI people want to create now is what they call AGI, artificial general intelligence. They're not claiming that this would be a conscious entity, but they're claiming that it could do reasoning and logic and put together ideas and even create creative ideas by combining previous ideas. You've heard, I'm sure you've heard many AI generated music,
Yeah,
even complete folk songs written
yeah,
and
yeah.
performed and sung and played, but from scratch by an AI. They can do that. It takes a high amount of intelligence, but it doesn't require consciousness. And so I know you want to get into that question: is what's the difference?
Yeah, and also how that relates to creativity. That's what I want to try and come out with this video. So I could claim my little bit of immortality is by, using your knowledge to get to a little video that might exist that, well, we may well be able to nail something of use in terms of how AI relates to creativity, because I don't think creativity is really thought about that much in terms of people don't hold it in their hand like, and this is why I think it's really important for guys like you to appear on channels like mine. And I'm sure people watching this who are interested in music, especially the type of music we all love, will be very interested in this. So I'm going to try and ask you the direct question now. Um, there's when you get out on the popular science internet, which is all I know because I'm a musician. There's this is this there's this guy that helped create the microchip. Is it Faggin? Yeah,
Yes,
and
that's
he
right,
he's
Fagan.
and he has said, and I read this, and I don't understand what he's really saying, but I can feel the aesthetic ramifications. What he said is that consciousness is created by the quantum field. I don't know what quantum field is, but he said it's created by the quantum field. And when you boil down who we are and what our consciousness is made up, it doesn't boil down to numbers. It boils down to the lack of numbers, which is the stuff you've been describing, the uncertainty that you've described. And I'm sorry if I'm so stupid. I'm trying my best to get through this, but I am fascinated by this. And when you look at artificial intelligence, when you boil that down, it comes down to numbers. And I'd said this in the video, and you came on, and this is why you're here, and you said, yes, but we are going to have quantum computers that will be the same. And when you said it, I was like, oh, that's a spanner in the works. I thought, and I went, I'm going to chat to you about it. I don't even know what you're talking about, but it sounds terrifying and amazing at the same time. So could you talk us through this, us laymen and lay women that just aren't able to understand it? Because I think this is the most important thing for scientists. You need to be able to communicate to us, because I'll believe you. You spent your whole life doing it. I trust you. I'll believe you. So you need to try and get it across to us so we know what the hell's going on.
Okay, first of all, you should not believe me because if you talk to 10 different quantum physicists, they'll probably give you a different answer. And this just illustrates the mystery of it. So, some very smart physicists say, yeah, there's the multiverse, and every time a decision is made, you split into two people, and then the whole universe goes on. But of course, this happens a trillion, trillion, trillion times every second across the galaxy. So there's a heck of a lot of universes being created.
I don't believe
Uh,
that one.
no, no, I don't
That
either.
can't
But
be right.
it, no, that's right. It's a good science fiction story.
Yeah.
But if you listen to super brilliant physicists like David Deutsch at Oxford University, who essentially invented the mathematics of quantum computing, he really, in some sense, believes that. But of course, his belief system is much more subtle than ordinary mortals can understand what he's
Mm.
actually saying. So, you know, take that with a grain of salt. It's not the only model, and I don't subscribe to it. I believe that quantum physics is a tool that an individual person uses in the real world to navigate around and poke on things and get responses and predict the future. In fact, there's theories of the human brain that says the brain is essentially a prediction machine. And there's some very nice books by a guy named Jeff Hawkins, who've written these very beautiful books on these ideas. He's trying to model how the brain works. And his model, and it agrees with many other brain scientists, that the brain is continually predicting everything before you see it or do it. So the analogy is you walk into a dark room at the middle of the night in your house, you can pretty much walk around that room. as long as your dog is not in the wrong place, you're not going to trip over anything. If you and your brain, you're actually walking through like a simulation in your brain of your room. Now, this happens, he claims, all the time, even like right now. Your brain is predicting 30 milliseconds before I say the word, what I'm going to say. And if I suddenly say the wrong word, elephant, you're probably going to notice that something went wrong, and you're going to key in on that difference. But if I keep talking in my usual science mumbo jumbo, just with scientific terms, and I don't say anything weird, your brain just accepts that as it is because you already modeled what I was probably going to say.
And also,
That's the
this what's interesting to say with this, because I've read a little bit about this myself, is that when you have the conscious thoughts that arises of, oh, they said the wrong word, that conscious not thought is not where the decision resides, because the decision resided, and they've measured it. It's actually a little bit before then, and it rises up from somewhere which we could call the subconscious, but I don't think that's a useful term. But this is very interesting, and this pulls into question how whether we have free will or not. Also, because free will, creativity, intelligence, consciousness, these are I can't help but feel that when you're doing creative stuff, you're sort of dealing in these areas, you see. Now, when I was a younger guy, I got into Gurdjieff, who was a mystic. And one of the things Gurdjieff said is he says if you go to a macro level, you won't be able to understand anything. The human beings cannot understand what's going on at a macro level. And if you go to a micro level, and he called these worlds, a human being is not able to understand what's going on those levels. And he said this like 120 years ago or whatever. And it seems that that's the case. And um, surely, if we take Einstein's view on the macro level, um, everything must be predicted because our time can shift. So it's someone is able to be in the future. Someone could exist in your future if you were traveling at great speeds. And at that point in time, that line between your position in time and theirs it's a single line. So if someone can be in the future has to be there. And yet at the same time, you're talking about multiverses. See, for me as a layman, the whole thing is all really it's so confusing. So,
it's
I don't
confused.
know.
It's confusing to scientists as well. And this is part of the problem. I just had a thought. The public now knows too much about what scientists are thinking. And scientists, it's almost as if you could see into the brain of every famous artist like Jackson Pollock, and see what he's actually thinking. Where the important thing is not that. The important thing is the final painting. And you really don't want to probably know what Jackson Pollock was thinking when he was dripping the paints and all that. I mean, that's a whole separate question because the guy in the studio next door might have been doing something completely different. And so scientists are always dreaming up wacky ideas. I tell my research students, think of a crazy idea, and here's my latest crazy idea. It's probably crazy, but let's run with it for a while and see why it doesn't work. But now the public is getting like I'm now spewing out a bunch of my own personal thoughts. The public's getting exposed too much to hundreds, if not more, scientists' crazy ideas. And then they start to think, oh, science is just crazy. They don't know what they're doing, and most of it is rubbish.
I
But
don't think
the
that. I mean,
truth,
I don't think that at all.
oh, but
But
the
I think
public does.
you have said a really interesting thing there, because again, we come back to this sort of negative aspect of the internet. Is that when I was a young kid, if I'd have wanted to know about quantum physics, I would have gone down to the library and bought a book, and I did, and you would read through, and you'd struggle with it, but you get something from it, and that would be that would be it. And then if you went down to the pub, you'd be chatting to a bar, you'd be chatting to someone. I've been reading a book on quantum physics. They probably hadn't. They would just listen to you discuss it and go, "Oh, that's interesting. Is that the case?" But now everybody can get just a little bit, and it's this thing that's happening in music at the moment. I think the big threat for musicians and the reason why they're terrified of AI, and they literally are. I've been talking to people high up in the music industry, and they said there's music producers, there's artists that are actually depressed. They're having to see psychologists because they know or they think that the AI is going to come in and just take away everything from them. And what I think is actually happening is the democratization of creativity. They had a monopoly on it. So because you had the sort of, I called it the Mount Olympus, which is the means by which you create the art of the 20th century, which wasn't the same as the art of the 19th century. It was, recording studios and film studios. And so you had to enter into that world. And so us musicians learnt that, and that was the holy grail. Enter into that world, and then you're a part of it, and then you create. And then the audience are the fans, and you're the creator. And Bob Dylan's up there, and he's the greatest songwriter of the 20th century, and we look up to them. And you're not really, like you've said, you're not part of that because they're at Mount Olympus. I think that's breaking down at the moment. And I think one of the things that's interesting about AI is that it doesn't matter whether it does what Dylan does or what creative people do. What will matter is how much people enjoy creating with the AI. And that's the other side of what you sort of said, is that people, there's a democratization going on. The question is whether you do require artistic specialists that are actually really involved in it, and they spend their day being creative, which is actually, I think, is quite a tortured, difficult thing to do if you do it seriously. It's very difficult, rather than just having a website where you go on and you dream up different genres and put them all in. I want a bit of reggae, but like Frank Sinatra, and you get something quite like that, and you present that. So this idea of specialization is quite interesting as well. But I think if I step back, what you're talking about is doing, aren't you? It's the doing that's important, in a way. And do you think that make any sense?
Well, that was the one aspect of it, was the motivation to be doing something, using the human facilities, faculties to actually do something that hadn't been done before, even if it's not great. So I'm sure there's 50 million singer-songwriters out there in the internet who are putting stuff out. Why do they do it? Because they have to do it, because it's fun. But I would then say that
But is it fun though? That's the question. You do it. Is it fun?
Oh yes, oh yes,
You enjoy it, do you?
oh yes. I love it. Yeah, yeah. It's just
So,
great
so
fun.
you're not you because I feel I have a compulsion to do it, but most of the time it's an utter torture.
Well, that's because it's only a hobby for me. I've never been a professional musician. Doing physics, it can be torture for me because I have to produce, some good result on a certain time scale. But as a hobby, music doesn't matter. So I can do it. But I think talking about the fact that there's too many people talking about too many ideas in science, as I said, maybe not always a good thing because the public doesn't necessarily understand what's going into making the sausage. The final important thing is the body of work that science produces. So it's an individual science produces their body of work, but the whole community of scientists produce a body of work. And that's something that holds together eventually. And there's a lot of dangling, murky details below it, but eventually this body of work emerges and carries on into the future. And then that body of work, the Kuhnian idea that eventually that body will be superseded by some other big break and changed into new
Mm.
bodies of work. But it really is a collective body of knowledge and way of working and way of thinking and results and moving forward. But the public doesn't see that. They really don't have the skill set to understand um, really how it works. And
I
they
don't
still
think
like to.
I don't think the public really even understand what science is. I think there's the idea of what
Mm.
science does gets twisted. A lot of my friends in the art side feel that scientists are up to something bad, and
Yes,
that
I see this
and
on YouTube.
they're trying to prove
Yes,
something. There's almost like a political or a moral reason why they would be coming up with these ideas.
yes. But climate change aside, okay, that's a big can of worms. But even the high energy colliders, the machine at CERN, the
Yeah.
Large Hadron Collider. I had a conversation with somebody on YouTube, the comment section, They were
Mm.
asking, why are the governments spending billions of dollars building this giant accelerator? They must be up to something.
They're
And
up to something.
I wrote back and I said, what they're up to is trying to understand nature because they're scientists and that's what they want to do. And then the person says, yeah, but why are the governments spending billions of dollars? And I said, because overall, the progress of humanity has been very much tied to learning more fundamental science,
You're
which then has,
basically explaining why science is a good thing,
yeah,
because
right, right.
everything you've got in your life that's comfortable and nice and makes you happy and live longer, everything is comes from people trying to work out how the universe works,
That's right.
and getting a model of how that works.
That's right.
It's
A great example is the GPS system. You're driving down the road, your GPS works. Why? It turns out that without Einstein's theory of general relativity, which he invented mathematically in 1915, the GPS system wouldn't work. And general relativity is the theory of space-time across the entire cosmos. So he wasn't thinking about GPS, right? He was thinking about how does the cosmos work? And that's really what drives scientists to do what they do at the basic level.
yeah,
But going back to your earlier question about creativity and quantum physics, I think
mm.
that's what you wanted to
Yeah, that's
board.
what I want. I'm trying to get
Yeah,
there in a sort of
yeah,
natural way, so that
yeah.
we arrive at there. We don't try and force it, I suppose, a little bit, but because
Have we arrived?
I still have questions like, um, I don't really understand when people say that the quantum field creates consciousness, right? I find something profound in that because it puts consciousness first, and that sort of resounds with what you've said that we live. It's our consciousness that we're experiencing, and that's sort of inside us, I suppose. And so when we look, we're actually looking into our consciousness, and our consciousness has limits. I think that's what you're saying. It has to be our consciousness that has limits. There could be entities in the material world that we have no idea because we have no way of perceiving them because they're not part of our consciousness. Is that correct?
Well, I wouldn't have said it in those words, but I wouldn't say it's wrong either.
Yeah,
Let me try to mention what this Federico Fagan was saying because you raised
yeah.
him. I've watched his videos. He also collaborates with a fantastically smart mathematician by the name of Mauro Dariano, who is a quantum theorist in
Mm,
Italy, I've known this gentleman for a long time, and he's a serious, mathematical scientist. Um, he doesn't just deal in speculation
no.
about woo-woo stuff. So I just want to make a warning that a lot of what we're talking about sounds kind of woo-woo,
Yeah,
and I'm
exactly.
not in that business.
No.
I don't believe there's any proven connection between consciousness and quantum physics and all these sort of ideas about consciousness creates the world through perception. Yeah, sure. I mean, John Wheeler, famous scientist, said maybe that's true, but there's no evidence that any of that is
Mm,
true. So we're talking speculation here, crazy ideas.
mm,
But you can develop crazy ideas using very rigorous mathematics. And this is what Dariano and Fagan have done.
mm.
So what they've said, my way of saying it, is that um, in they think consciousness creates information. Now, they didn't say that way exactly, but that's how I say it. And it turns out that in quantum physics, because there are events that are random, that occur for with no causation, they have to have necessary conditions. But once you have the necessary conditions, they may occur this way or the other way. And there's no underlying causality that causes one thing versus the other thing to happen. And when that thing happens, you don't know which is going to happen, but something happens that creates information because now you know what happened. Before that, you didn't know what was going to happen. Okay. So this is also the idea of quantum entanglement. And this is pointed out by Schrodinger and many people later that if I have two particles that are in a quantum entangled state, which people say, they're somehow correlated in some quantum way that you can't
Mm.
describe by classical logic. That's true. The point about if I know what the quantum state is, I can write down an equation on paper, say this is the state because I prepared it that way, or somebody told me they prepared it that way. This description of this quantum state is the maximal and complete information about that pair of objects. It's a complete description. Unlike what Einstein thought quantum mechanics is incomplete, Bohr said no, it is complete. That knowing the quantum state, which is like the condition of the particles, if you know that, that's complete information. But it's complete information about the two particles together. It's kind of like I just have an analogy. Let's say there's a married couple, and you know that the sum of their heights is what, 7 meters exactly. Okay, you know that. That's the complete description of the couple, but that doesn't tell you anything about the individuals. However, if you then measure the height of one spouse, you can immediately infer the height of the other spouse. So you've created information by making the measurement. Now, to make it short here, it's believed that in classical physics descriptions like Newtonian mechanics of particles moving around, that's deterministic theory. And so in theory, information is never created in the concepts of classical physics, because in principle, if you know the initial conditions, the state, you could predict everything perfectly into the future. Now you can't really by practical reasons, but in principle you could. Whereas in quantum mechanics, you can't. If you know the perfect knowledge about the state, you still cannot predict what happens. Therefore, when something happens, it creates information. And the idea is that consciousness, my idea would be that it's that act of information creation and getting back to creativity. Where does the new thing come from? I'm not saying that there's a little quantum device inside the brain that's entangled or something like that, because the brain is at such a much higher level of information organization. But if you want to know where creativity fundamentally comes from in the quantum mechanical model, you could say it comes there because quantum events create information. They create something new.
Yeah, yeah.
Creativity. Yeah.
So so it doesn't negate a material reality, which I didn't think it did when I read it. There is a material reality out there, but that material reality at a quantum level is creating this is it's qualia they did, but that's information, isn't it? And so our consciousness is created by that material reality, but our consciousness is not that material reality because that's something else, and that is why the unknowable resides in it, and how we exist within it, um, which is almost like, I would say, from an aesthetic point of view, is trying to square the circle. Because I think we all are aware that we are in ourselves looking out, and
Mhm.
then religion and all these aesthetic things tries to make us feel like we're outside looking in. And science also tries to do that, tries to get a God's eye view. And so, what this is really doing is something, what you're describing is actually quite straightforward and simple. It's trying to bring those two things together. Now, I believe that's what creativity does as well, but dealing with our emotions and our feelings, more than our rational and empirical powers of understanding what's going on out there. And I think that's where those two things relate. But what's interesting is, do you think, if that's the process that is going on, and this Fagan guy is saying this is why AI will never be able to be creative because it's part of that, it's part of the qualia, isn't it? It's not, it doesn't create the information, it is part of the information, it is created from within, it's just another aspect. But you're saying that if we move towards quantum computing, you could have, what would that would God, my brain's. It's, I love chatting to clever people because I can feel my brain is just going, "Come on, Andy!" It's like an old car, and I've got my foot all the way down, um, trying to get up this hill. Oh, and I love it. It's brilliant, and I hope people can appreciate watching this. That I am so confused, but I felt like I was onto something then, wasn't I, Michael? I was onto something, that there's a simplicity there, but you can't touch it. It's the fact that that's just the way it is.
It's inscrutable.
Yeah, it's like a Zen thing. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
it is.
yeah. And this doesn't come from philosophy. This comes from 100 years of studying quantum physics,
Yeah.
that it would actually be there's some inscrutable thing out there. I'm not going to take a view of panpsychism where every electron has consciousness. So that's not what I think.
Mm,
But I do think I disagree with Fagan, sorry, pronunciation,
mm.
that I didn't understand why he concluded that that consciousness is coming from quantum mechanical processes, yet a quantum computer could not be conscious. And I don't see
Yeah,
that. I
it's
think
not. Now, when you said that, I thought, well, this is really interesting.
yeah,
Uh,
I don't see why it couldn't be. Now, it's not going to have a human consciousness. It's not going to know about the taste of scrambled eggs or, why I love my wife, but it's going to have a consciousness of a quantum computer. It's like, I think a worm has consciousness, but it's worm-like consciousness. It doesn't have to be human-like. So this will be quantum computing-like consciousness. It'll be creating new ideas that are truly new, coming from nowhere, well, coming from internal, that inscrutable region, coming from out of there, creating new things, and you'll be able to talk to it, and it will seem like a consciousness, and it might be one. But this is like 50 years in the future.
yeah,
I think the
but
quantum computers, in order to
I'm
reach
not.
that level.
I'm not so much interested in that about the future and the idea that it's going to be all like Terminator. There'll be these dangerous, conscious robots that they decide that human beings aren't very good because that's all the sort of Christian fall, that human beings are sort of bad in some way. And it's like there's aspects in this that's in the culture which artists can actually talk about. I can't talk about the science like you can, but what I can step back and go, no, what you're seeing there, this idea that AI is going to come out and it's going to why is it going to destroy us? Because we're not very good. And where's that? This is an idea that is in art. It's not in science. It's in art. And artists have made that point, and that has been useful in a way of measuring the world in terms of our emotions and our feelings. But it might be the artists have to, um, the artists might, we might have to. I felt this so many times, and it relates to things like the climate emergency. Is we might have to sort of retreat back into our humanity and realize it doesn't matter what the computers do or what they think, whether they're conscious or not. All it relates is to us as human beings. And if we all stick together as human beings, we'll be okay. Computers will do what they want, but it doesn't matter because it's actually it's like worrying about the worm's consciousness. There's no point in worrying about it. We should just worry about our consciousness, our personal consciousness, and hopefully be able to marry up our consciousness with other people's consciousness, which I would call love. That is what is very important, and I think that's what art does. Is it's about love and it's about finding a connection. And I this conversation's actually been a very zen-like conversation, and it's calmed the waters for me. Now that I want to call him Faggy, but I keep thinking of Oliver Twist. Then he wants to pick a pocket or two. Now he doesn't want to pick. But the point is that oh, I've lost my thread now. Because this is so simple. You said it right at the beginning. This is a very simple truth, if it's a truth at all. It's a very simple thing that you have to let it be and say you don't. My mum used to say this. She used to say you don't know. Because we'd ask mom questions. Mom, is this happening? When she goes, just say you don't know. In other words, she didn't want to answer it. And I think I think that I find that quite comforting. We need to step back into our humanity. That art needs to be valued for doing that, for showing us who we are and how we exist in the world from an aesthetic point of view, and how we have stories and archetypes and all these things. That I'm sure when you're trying to write songs, you're trying to describe that balance that I mentioned. I think when you're a songwriter, is trying to see the world in a novel way rather than it's to open up another way of seeing the world from a storytelling point of view.
Mhm. That's right. Yeah, you're trying to describe the world. You can't understand the world, but you're taking a certain take on it. And in quantum physics, that's kind of what it's like, is you do an experiment and you're not sure what's really happening at the lowest level, but your perceptions and your instruments allows you to make a take on it. That's
Yeah.
almost like a musical take. Okay, we've worked on this song long enough. That's the take. This take 12. We're done. The song is done. It's done. And that's people talk about quantum wave function collapse. This is, if we had more time, we could talk about the
Mm.
quantum measurement problem. What's that all about? Quantum theory predicts that nothing ever collapses, therefore nothing ever happens. But yet we see things happening. And there's a school of thought, which I can tell you about later, that it's kind of like musical take, where it's what the perception allows you to do to decide at some point, okay, that's a wrap, and then you move on. So in the quantum experiment, that thing happens. Okay, I could keep exploring it, but I'm not going to. That's a wrap, and I'm going to take that as reality, and I'm going to move on. In fact, finally, I should mention that even Stephen Hawking, in the last 10 years of his life, came around to sort of like this way of thinking. And that's a big shock because in his early career, I didn't really like the way he wrote books where everything was like the theory of everything.
Theory
We're
of
going to have
everything. Yeah.
the equation. Yeah, there's the real world out there, and here's my equation that describes what the real world is doing. And over the decades, he came around to the thinking that no, that's maybe not quite right. If you look out into the cosmos, we don't know what's doing, but we can build these models of it, and we can try to grok it as much as possible.
But the thing you described about science having some utility and some use, what you have done and what you've explained here, from a sort of aesthetic point of view, which is an emotional point of view, it has actually calmed me down a little bit. It's done something which art often does, which goes, just stop, just let it be, just let it be. Now, I think with Fagin or whatever it's called, he had an experience, didn't he? He is working from a sort of he's had almost like a religious revelatory experience of his own consciousness being different, and he's used that to interpret the world in a certain way. And I would say there's one way of seeing the world where that is the case, but I think it could be moving away from what you've described, which is much more pragmatic in terms of what science is doing, which is like just don't get carried away with it because you can get carried away with it, and it's fun to get carried away with it. But you'll come back to saying, but there's this other aspect of science. So there's a dialectic in science which is go, that's brilliant. Let's have the mad ideas, but now let's check it. And the checking, we have to be aware that the checking is really, really important. And it's the same thing as like you could scream your head off and you can, have all the most emotional, screamy stuff in your music. But if you go too far, people are just going to switch off. So you've got to pull it down. We need a few verses and choruses. It needs, you need to be at least a bit in tune. And those are the things I think that us as human beings, we get up in the morning and that's what we do. And that's what I've come at. It's all about doing. And the doing can
Mhm.
be profound, but it's probably best not to dwell too much on the profundity and get back to the doing.
That's right. And it makes me think about walking through a museum of modern art. And I think you've touched on this in your channel. You can walk there, you can say, those 50 things are not art. That's rubbish. But this is real art. And so just because somebody threw up something on the wall and had a crazy mad idea doesn't mean that it's art. Same with music. And the
That
same with
that's
science.
that's a new idea I'm having, and it's like it doesn't
Yeah.
mean that when somebody says everything is art, it could be because that's an aesthetic. We're not talking about science here; it's an aesthetic view. John Cage says any sound is music, and I agree. But it might be of use to go, well, no, this is just like what AI does. It's just they've just cobbled together all these things in the past, and it was a brave attempt, and it's enjoyable and it's entertaining, but it doesn't actually. So we are putting a certain aspect on art. We're changing what art does because human beings have done this all along. I'm going to try and offer something to you, which may, from someone who's had a scientific background, may see where I'm coming from a more grounded position. If human beings were traveling, which they did, they human beings have left Africa and they moved around the whole earth. And so this is something that human beings did, this great big exodus of people going. And it's a very interesting thing because you could just rest on your laurels or stay where you are, but human beings did that. They moved. And I find that fascinating that they did that. When they found a certain place, they're now looking for a place to reside. And that place that they want to reside in has to have a certain bunch of attributes. And when you look at painting, especially landscape painting, beautiful landscapes tend to embody what would be a nice place to reside for that, you know. And we then have an understanding aesthetically, and people will put a sunset on their wall and it's flat, or maybe there's a glade, there's a nice sunny glade, and there's some water. You know, this sort of real old-fashioned idea of landscape painting. You got a little brook, you got some protection, but you could see out, you know, and all this type of stuff. I got this from Steven Pinker. He described this, that that's a way of looking at art. We go, well, there's actually a real good use for that. And so the art is like the way human beings have stored that, so they know what they're looking for. It's a way of going, yeah, I recognize that, and then that keeps going on, and then that quality idea of that safe space can now be contrasted against a dangerous space. So now we now have in the art something that has a utility of going, that's dangerous, that's safe. Once you've got that, you could start to work, well, how would I, what if I apply that to, say, politics, you see? And then by doing that, an artist can play with these entities, which are actually originally formulated in actual, that sort of actual utility of finding a beautiful place, because it's going to be a nice place to be. Now, me as a drummer, I can remember having an idea that I was vacuuming. I had to do a lot of vacuuming once. So I'm pushing this vacuum up and down, I thought, this is horrible because I'm not in a rhythm. I need to get into a rhythm with this vacuuming. And then I suddenly found I was in a rhythm, and I suddenly thought, this is going back to people. They must have had to go out and pick like things out the fields, you know, they grown, you know, they were harvesting. That's the word. And if you're harvesting, you would have to go across this whole field, picking the thing up, putting it in. And the way you would do that would be in a sort of circular, rhythmical point of view. That's the way you get through it. And then you might sing, and you hear it, you know, the slave plantations, people would sing, and the music comes out of this, and groove comes out of this. And then you look at Afro-American slave experience, and you look at what happened on those plantations, and then you look at the groove, the sense of groove that comes out of that. So when we hear a cool groove, when we hear a funky beat, we know that's right because it relates to the right way of harvesting crops. I know this is, I just want to offer that because I think I've always wanted to say that to a scientist to see what they'd take is go, well, yeah, I could that does that seem to make sense to you in terms of the utility of art and why art is more than just entertainment and fun?
I'm not sure. What was that noise? Um, uh, I'm not sure, but I would say that that's one of the problems I have with the Western classical music. There's no groove to it.
No.
So, but that's just me. There's a lot of other great stuff in there, which I love, but no groove. But I would go back to you mentioned John Cage, and I just want to make the comment that whether something is art or not depends on context, and that's cultural context and historical context. And of course, John Cage could make a piece of music that was total silence, which wouldn't have made much impact 100 years earlier. But in his lifetime, because of the cultural context, it did make a lot of sense. And of course, that's true with all kind of modern musics, including classical music. But as far as the utility, I'm sure from a scientific point of view, there's a lot of truth in that because animals, they there's some thought that like whales and so on, are they just talking to each other or are they actually performing music? But is there even a difference? Maybe the music and the talking.
Really, that is a fascinating thing when you look at human history. That you see the obviously the invention of language have been this sort of step forward, and then
Mhm.
the sort of what you call English philosophy, which deals with logic and how they really see that the meaning comes from that, and you have sort of logicians checking you guys to make sure what you're doing is following because that all comes from the language, and then you can write language down so you can store information, which means scientists can now say, "Oh, I did this," and then someone else can go, "Oh my God, they did that," and I made, and so language we forget that it is actually aesthetic. It's sounds, and the sounds mean something, and it would be silly to differentiate the meaning because if I'm talking to you, the way I'm talking is not just the words, because there's a music to it which you understand, and when you listen to certain musicians, great improvisers are great because you can listen to them and they talk to you. And so it's far more than just the words. And so the logician doesn't have to take that into account. They can just look at the truth statement and go, well, that all, the premise, ends up with the conclusion, and they can follow that through. But actually, it doesn't take on the fact that it could be spoken in a very sarcastic way. And so these are the areas where I think it's a good way to look at things like that to understand what music and art is, and how they're rooted in these very everyday normal things that human beings do, and how we read the world around us. Talking to you, I'm boiling everything down to thinking it's this the best way to go. This is something that the artists can. The artists, we're too romantic. We fly off. I'm I do this on my channel, and I enjoy it, and people enjoy it as well. And then Brendan LeVar, who's the philosopher of mathematics, comes on and said, "Andy, you're doing this too much," and I'm really taking that on board. And there's part of me goes, "Yeah, but it's fun, and people enjoy it." When I stood up and said I'm going to be immortal at the end of that video, I didn't really believe that, but it was an interesting artistic statement that could be the case. But I think talking to you, it's made me realise that these things are a lot more simpler, and it's part of our. It's probably human beings that desire to know the truth. It's the desire to be immortal. It's the idea. It's the shaking the fist at God that you get in Greek mythology, and the desire to be immortal. That's something human beings do, and it damns us. That's what I've come out at. That there's this thing that's going on that human beings do, which is apart from the simple, rational examination of the world that you've described.
Yeah, I think you have to go into flights of fantasy in order to come up with new ideas. You have to have that liquidity, if you like, of
Yeah,
crazy things happening, but then you have to bring it back to the simple. And that's really what a good science theory or a good scientist is doing. And one thing I don't like about the worldwide quantum physics communication apparatus is that you see a lot of these headlines and even a lot of scientific papers where they seem to be trying to make it sound as complicated as possible, so that everybody was like clickbait, right? So, oh, that's really amazing. The scientists are geniuses. Time goes backwards. Blah blah blah. It's all. But the real purpose of science is to make everything as simple as
simple.
possible,
Yeah, and
not as
that's really
complicated as
important. Yeah,
possible.
it's incredible. And I tell you something, a lifetime of doing music, the big profound realization I had was I got really involved in playing the drums, playing the guitar. I studied harmony. I worked on technique. I still do. I'll do 4 hours a day. I mean, I've got a bad hand at the moment trying to fix that. But I'm obsessed with technique, and I go deep into it, deep into it. And then you start to listen to music in those terms, and then you listen to great musicians, and you go, "Oh my God, listen to Jimi Hendrix," and that, and then you learn to balance and go, Hendrix is a great guitarist, even though he's not technically the great guitarist, because there's something else going on, blah blah blah. And then when I got to a certain point, I realized that what songwriters wanted for musicians was for them to disappear into their song. It took me 30 years to understand this, to be able to see it from the songwriter's point of view. And the person who told me this was Robert Plant. Robert once said to me, I want a drummer just to disappear into my song. He said, but because I work with such good drummers, they are always putting their imprint on it. I was like, but that's what you're supposed to do. And he went, no, I don't want that. And I realized that there were incredible musicians out there who were egoless and were like Ringo Starr's the best example of this. Ringo just disappears into the song and he's quite happy. He doesn't want anyone to think he's the best drummer in the world. He's actually a very good drummer. If you listen to the speed he's playing certain roles, or you watch him and his right hand's going like 10 to the dozen. He got some technique, that guy, but he disappears into the song. And that's the profound thing, that it's actually very simple. And the reason why I'm practicing now is I've hurt my hand. That's from tension. I've been too tense. I've been trying too hard, and now I'm on
Mm.
a. It's going to take me a year. I'm working on this hand's fine, but this hand I've got to still take some tension out of it. I'm having to wear all this all day. I'll stop teaching because of this, because I realised I didn't know
Yeah.
enough, and I'm. This is a really profound thing that I'm going through at the moment every single day, about 4 hours of just trying to get the stick to float. And it's like I'm trying to take myself out of it. I don't want to be there. I want the stick to be doing it, not me.
Okay, I have a challenge for you. Okay, I just laid down a track of a song that I wrote. It's got vocal and bass. I brought in a vocalist who can sing better than I can, bass and guitar song I wrote. There's a click track. It's a
Mm.
folk song. Okay, it's basically like four chords, folk song. And I imagine the real drum track would just be brushes on the snare and cymbals and maybe a kick drum. Folk music, three chord song, as simple as possible. I'll send you the
Yeah.
logic. I'll send it to you, and you can try to lay down the simplest possible disappearing drum track. Yeah.
It's something that I could talk to you about this for hours, and all the experiences I've had of being. I'm a very technical drummer, and I got a ton of chops. But my idea of what technical chops is has changed as time's gone on. When you're playing the drums for a songwriter, the thing you need to do is you have to look at the lyrics and understand what the story's about, because you're a character in that. And that's what you're adding to it. Is the songwriter wants in their film that they've created, in their story, you're like a character actor in the background. You're not the main actor, that's the singer. And they've got to tell the story of the song, and they've got to feel it. But the drummer can do something very simple, but they can actually change it in a way that the general public wouldn't see as being virtuoso. Now, Ringo Starr does this absolutely all the time. So if you think of I Am the Walrus, and that's very heavy, I am, and anyone else would be going, bum, bum, bum. He just goes on the tom, bang, bang, bang. And that totally changes how you perceive the tune. So it's not just like getting out the way. The genius drummers are able to do virtually nothing, but actually add something to it, where the songwriter hopefully would go, oh my God, they really understood the song, and they were able to add something that I couldn't imagine, but they're empathetic to the story. And these are the very simple things that musicians they get too involved and don't realize. Now, I've had a big problem with Bob Dylan all my life. I never liked him because I'm like a jazz guy, got horrible voice. The chord changes are simple. I don't understand the lyrics because I want to hear some guitar. I'll be one of these people. But I've spent my whole life knowing that this guy was perhaps the greatest genius of the second half of the 20th century in terms of music. And I've been working at it and working at it. And my friend Kevin Gammond, who came up in the 1960s with Robert Plant, they're all Dylan fans, right? They love him. And I've been going on about how much I hate Blonde on my channel, as you know. And I
Yeah.
do hate it. I still hate it. But the other day, I decided to listen to the albums in order. So I listened to his first album. That's all covers of old folk songs, except for a couple. And I thought, wow, this is where this took a 60s audience back to Leadbelly and Woody Guthrie. This is really great. And I thought, and Dylan is actually he's quite a competent folk performer. His voice is much better than I thought here, and he's playing guitar playing. It's great. I thought that's quite interesting. Then I go to the next one, which I think is freewheeling. And as soon as I heard blowing in the wind, the context I suddenly got, and I thought, oh my God, he's taken that folk form, but then what he's doing is he's saying exactly the right thing that everybody needs to hear in 1962. It's a herald of the future, and he says it's blowing in the wind. It's not even him, and it's genius. And I thought, oh my God, he's a genius. and then bring it on home, the follow-up album where he brings the band in and he does Subterranean Homesick. But he basically invents rock music, and I've suddenly got it from an emotional point, even though I had it from an intellectual point. I got it. Now, Blonde on Blonde is his big splashy experimental album, and opened the doors for people like Frank Zappa and the Beatles, and I understand all that, but I still haven't got it yet. You see, and it's because I'm trying to see sophistication rather than just stepping back and seeing it as what it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And then,
it
so
makes a lot of
talking to
sense.
you as a quantum physicist and a Dylan fan, I've been able to now explain that as best I can here. And so, from your take on science, of just going, you don't know. This is the use of it. Leave it. That's the way it is. Great art should be like that, really. And I do deal with the airy fairy and flowery. What happens though if I take your advice and I end up just coming on and not going off on my flights of fancy? What would
No,
happen then?
you should do that. That's why I liked your void video, because you were almost enacting it, um, like a Shakespearean play or something. There were different characters and whatnot. At first, I thought, "What is this?" But then the more I got into it, you started really getting into really great ideas. But it was also theatrically done, and I think that good physics is also theatrically done. Like when I get up on a stage and I have to give a lecture to a bunch of physicists, I kind of take on a theatrical persona, and I start
You,
to
you
talk
have
in.
done a really brilliant job, I think, of you've done a very good thing for quantum physics today, right? You have been able to expand the mystery and profundity, and I've felt it, but you've also been able to ground it as well at the same time, and that's a very powerful thing. And hopefully, a few thousand people will watch this. I don't think it'll be a big view video. I've got to try and get some clickbaity title that brings them all in, and that's the beat, the Barnum aspect of this. Uh, but as long as you bring him in and they get, I think people who watch this will go, well, that was really, really good. Because I think a lot of us normal people are going, what the hell's all this quantum physics? What does it mean? It means we have a free will or not? I don't. There's all this going on, and for you to come on and say, well, just don't worry about it. You can't know. The free will discussions like that, it's like you can't know whether we got a free will or not. It seems like we have one.
That's right. But science will progress, and we'll learn more about how the brain works, and we'll get more and more detail. But it doesn't mean we'll ever answer the question that you want to know in philosophy or in art. But the mystery will still remain.
The question is the fact that we're human beings and that we need to ask that question. That's why we're here. We ask
That's
that
right.
question, and that question has the utility of not getting answered, but driving us forward. That's what that question does. It's like what gets you out of bed in the morning. It's the same thing. Doesn't matter what it is as long as you get out of bed. It's the doing. The doing's important, and the
Yeah.
navel gazing is okay, but the doing's important. And what no one understands is that when I do my flights of fantasy, this has replaced my creativity as a musician. I don't see that I don't see I'm a lecturer imparting information. I feel I'm creating a piece of entertainment, and if I can get into a certain zone, the journey is actually quite interesting to me. I don't know what the hell I'm going on about. I've done a video on Wolfpack, which
Uh,
is the jazz fusion band Wolfpack. I'm really proud of it because what happened, I really did get to a place of not knowing what the hell I was talking about at all, and it was like I'm jumping between two things. It's nothing to do with Wolfpack really. It's to do with being a human being.
mhm.
It's to do with the existential angst, and then there's then like, you know, jumping around, smelling the flowers, and talking to you. It has been. I, I got quite interested in Taoism when I was younger, as a sort
Yeah.
of the antithesis of the sort of great Western, romantic idea of artists and the tortured artist. It's like if you want a sculpture, you go down into the riverbed and you pull out a stone. You go, oh, I like that one, and it's just the choice of the stone. That's the creativity. You use that stone, or you want a picture on a wall, get a piece of slate off your roof, and that's the picture on the wall. Well, that's what AI is going to do. It's going to come up with all this stuff, but it'll be us that will be deciding whether it's great or art or not, in the same way as a Taoist would. And
Yeah,
I
But the smartest physicist I ever knew, who was also my best friend, was a practicing Buddhist as well, PhD physicist and Buddhist. And so I learned a lot from him about the
Yeah,
unreality of reality and so on. So that helped me think about it. But I wouldn't just take it from the sort of religious philosophical viewpoint, but it has to come from the science.
yeah.
But
I think you've
happily,
done that. I
even
think we've done, Michael. I think we've got. I feel like we've got there. Do you feel like we've done something okay? We'll find
yes.
out in the comments, won't we, what they think?
Yes, yes, I would be very happy to see comments. I'm sure there'll be a lot of pushback in both directions, and that's good
No,
for
they're too
science.
nice, my lot. If they do any pushback, I'll tell them off. You know what I'm like in the comments. I'll come in. I'll block them if I have to.
No, no, no. Don't do that. There's so many viewpoints on how to look at science and quantum physics that that's part of the point is that there's too many viewpoints, and everybody has their own right to have a viewpoint. It doesn't mean they're all correct or useful, but they can be expressed, so that's fine. I'm
I
open-minded.
appreciate the fact that you've spent a lifetime doing this. And right at the top of this video, he says something very profound: is that we can't know about the wave and the particle. We can't know about it. We just can't. And you have to learn to accept that. That's the truth. Is accepting that. That's the truth.
That's right. That's the way the world is.
Yeah,
We didn't build it. I mean, um, I don't know if God built it or where it got built,
it's not our business
but
to know. It's
yeah,
not our
you
business
mentioned
to know.
earlier that God is maybe the mystery, and another way to say it is that God represents everything we don't know and cannot know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've
that's right.
I've I've changed my opinion though, and I'd love to have a conversation with you about God because that's a big one. Whether I could do it on this channel, I don't know. Um, I won't get into it. But I think it's 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 heartwarming to know you can have these conversations with scientists and they won't just go tell you off. So, like Richard Dawkins gets a bit snotty, doesn't he? If you were to talk about these things, and you go, "I just don't
Yeah,
understand what you're
yeah.
saying," but that's not every scientist, is it? So um, I think there's an enjoyment in doing this. There is a hedonist aspect to it all. I think we done it, Michael. I really do appreciate you getting in touch and spending your time, chatting to a lowly rock and roll drummer as myself, and being able to impart a lifetime of experience in what you've done. It's an incredible thing,
Oh,
and
my
I hope.
pleasure. And maybe we can continue the discussion offline.
Yes, definitely. And also, I pulled together two philosophers, Brendan and John, and we're going to do another chat. And I did message him, said, "Would you, but could Michael jump in and a couple?" And they said, "Yeah, that would be a nice idea." So I'd quite like to bring you in. It's a bit hard actually with even the three people discussing. We probably would need to have a bit of a
Mhm.
plan, but it would be
Mhm.
interesting for everyone just to say hello. And it might be something we do offline. But I'm quite interested in being a rock musician that actually brings all these academic types together because I
Mhm.
don't think you guys. I know that every scientist I've met loves art and is involved in art. I want them to talk about art. I want to get the opinion. And this has been useful for me. I think it'll be useful for a lot of musicians out there because we are not tortured. We're tortured. Right, my wife's calling me up now. Sorry about
Oh,
this, Mike.
okay.
I will answer it because it's the comedy thing. Hello, Danny. I don't know. I'll be down in a minute. I'm doing an interview with a quantum physicist. I will. Okay, all right, I'm done now. Sorry about that, Michael. Family,
Okay.
but this is the thing. Family life comes along, and I have to go back to the mundane now.
Okay. Real quick one. Are you in London? Because I'm going to be in London March 6th.
I'm about 2 hours away from London.
That's no, that's a bit awkward. Yeah. Well, I'm not. I'm going to be there for a couple of days, but I'll probably be tied up with physics things. So I
I
was
bet,
hoping
yeah.
if you
Well,
were
just
in
let me
London, we
know.
could.
I never know what I'm doing. March the
Yeah.
6th. I think I might have a gig at that point, but
It's a
yeah.
Thursday. It's a Thursday. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, shall
But
we, shall we
yeah.
shall we finish this one off?
Yes, please. Let's do. All right.
Bye bye, everybody. Thank you, Michael, for coming here. And I will now switch the thing off, which I never can
Okay.
do.